12.
And so, the champion has game point to level the match.
To many of you watching, this might just look like an old match from a bygone era, a relic of a time before badminton became the high-speed, explosive game we know today. But whilst it is undeniable that badminton has evolved to insane levels, this match on screen isn't just a random one I've pulled from the archives. No, this is a match between two icons of their day, two players who created a rivalry that was the talk of the badminton world. This is the 1975 All England men's singles final between Svend Pri of Denmark and Rudy Hartono of Indonesia. It's a final that isn't necessarily remembered for the badminton that was played, but more for the crushing weight of history. Rudy Hartono was chasing an unthinkable 8th consecutive title, while Svend Pri was chasing a title and a player that had eluded him his whole career. It is a final that, even with that brief introduction, you can tell has potential for quite the story. But let me tell you, the reality of that story is far greater than you could ever imagine. It's a story about chasing records and creating history, cementing new dynasties and reviving old ones, dealing with the immense pressure of being the very best, and it was a match that would leave a lasting impact on both men's lives. This is the compelling and bittersweet story behind the 1975 All England men's singles final.
Yes, yes! And he's done it! He's done it! That's one of the great emotional moments of sport for me. Here at Wembley. And the final on this occasion is between Rudy Hartono on the far side there. There he is.
Singles.
And on the other side
Green on my left,
is Svend Pri of Denmark.
On my right, Rudy Hartono.
If you wish to understand the weight of the 1975 All England men's singles final, you must first understand the stage it was played on. First held in 1899, the All England Badminton Championships, or All England for short, is the oldest tournament in badminton history. And as with many sporting origins, usually the first open tournament is often adopted as the unofficial World Championships. The All England was no exception. Although for its first 40 years the All England did kind of live up to its name, barring the odd outlier, all participants and champions were from the British Isles, not exactly a World Championships. It was in 1947, following a 7-year gap due to World War II, that this changed, with the number of entrants growing as well as the nationalities they represented. This diversity had an immediate impact. In 1947 and 1948, the first two editions back after World War II, for the first time in the All England's near 50-year history, there were no winners from the British Isles. This, as it transpired, was a sign of things to come, as whilst it wasn't long before the British Isles had winners once more coming in the women's and mixed events, in the men's events the British Isles would never again, as of time of writing this, have an All England champion. In their place, a new dynasty was being born, and it would reign almost untouched for the next 20 years. This was the era of Malaysia and Denmark. With Malaysian players like the Chung brothers Eddie and David, as well as Wong Pen Soon, and Danish powerhouses like Finn Cabero and Erland between 1947 and 1967, Denmark and Malaysia won 39 out of a possible 42 men's titles at the All England. In the men's singles, you can split these two countries into two even clearer dynasties. Throughout the majority of the 1950s, it was Malaysia who ruled, with Eddie Chung and Wong Pen Soon sharing the title with 4 each. Then in the late 1950s to late 1960s, it was one man who truly ruled the All England Championships, Erland. With his deft touches, tactical brilliance, and a level of physicality not often seen for the times, Erland was an incredibly diverse player, and he used all of that to win a record-breaking 7 All England men's singles titles, with the last of those coming in 1967 at the age of 30. In 1967, whilst Erland was showing no signs of slowing down, he would go on to win 2 more men's doubles titles in 68 and 69, with the emergence of younger Malaysian players like Tan Ai Kwang, who had won the All England in 1966, it certainly felt like the future was now. As such, many were looking to see who could lead the next generation of Danish shuttlers, who could carry on the mantle that Erland had created. An ominous task for any young player, but it seemed there was already a player that came to mind: Svend Pri. Svend Pri, or Sven Andersen as he was known then, was very similar to Erland in many ways, although I'd say he took the physical element to the next level. Sven was known for some brutally hard training sessions. At times he would train with a Danish cycling team, with one story my mum telling me jumping to mind. My mum recalls seeing Sven on an exercise bike once, and with a crazed look on his face, he made the exercise bike visibly shake, almost smoke, with the sheer effort he exerted. This intent on the physical game meant Svend Pri was known for his strength on court. He didn't move as smoothly as Erland, nor was he as technically orthodox, but his power and explosiveness more than made up for that, with Sven possessing one of the hardest smashes of his time. It was with that physicality combined with youth on his side that in the build-up to the 1967 All England Championships, many had the 22-year-old Svend Pri as the biggest threat to Erland winning the title. What added to this was that Sven and Erland had faced each other in 5 previous finals, with the younger Dane winning 3 of them. In fact, it was following one of those finals, the London Championships, where Svend Pri won 26 points before Erland scored himself, that many people saw him as a future world champion. But for all this world-winning potential, in 1967 he never got going, falling in the very first round. Now, while Sven did lose in the opening round of the singles, he did make up for that in the doubles events, not only reaching the final of the men's doubles, but winning the mixed doubles with Erland, proving his badminton ability. Regardless of the reason for his singles loss, if Sven wanted to win the biggest prize in badminton, the All England men's singles title, he knew he'd have to improve and develop as a player. Something which he most certainly did, as by the time he came back to Wembley in March of 1968, he would do so as the #1 seed. The only issue for Svend Pri, and by extension the whole badminton world, was that at those 1968 All England Championships, a new player emerged. A player who wouldn't just beat Pri en route to claiming the title, but a player who would go on to create a dynasty the All England had never seen before or since: Rudy Hartono. These days, Rudy Hartono is a name that is instantly recognisable to all Indonesian badminton fans, and a lot of general badminton fans as well. Rudy Hartono was Indonesia's first true badminton superstar on the global stage. Now, it must be said that whilst Hartono may be Indonesia's first true badminton superstar, he certainly wasn't their first badminton success. A decade before Hartono even first stepped foot onto a court for Indonesia, other Indonesian players were delivering success on the biggest stage. In 1958, in their first ever time at the World Men's Team Championships, the Thomas Cup, Indonesia won the competition, defeating the 3 top teams of the time: Denmark, Thailand, and then 3-time reigning and undefeated champions Malaysia in the final. 2 key players in this victory were Tan Jo Hock and Ferry Sonneville, and just 2 years later in 1959, these 2 would contest the first ever all-Indonesian men's singles final at the All England. Although neither player would win at the All England or even contest another final, mainly due to the dominance of Erland, they were instrumental in Indonesia winning the Thomas Cup 2 more times in 1961 and 1964. In 1967, the Thomas Cup was held at the Istora Senayan in Jakarta, Indonesia. The final was between the top 2 teams and fierce rivals, Indonesia and Malaysia. 12,000 fans crammed into a venue designed for 10,000. This final wasn't just a match, it was a powder keg waiting to explode. By day 2, yes, back then Thomas Cup ties were the best of 9 played over 2 days, Malaysia led 4-1, just 1 win away from the trophy. But when the Indonesians clawed back to 4-3, the crowd reached a fever pitch. During the 8th match, a men's doubles between Ungbun B and Tan Yi Kan and Muhadi and Aga Sazanto, the atmosphere turned from supportive to scary. When the Indonesians won the second game in setting, 18-13, levelling the game, the stadium went quite literally berserk, with fans borderline rushing the court. Fearing a repeat of the 1964 Thomas Cup final between Indonesia and Denmark, where riots broke out and a photographer was attacked by Indonesian students, BWF official Herbert Scheel, alongside PBSI president Padmo Sumanto, made a move unheard of in the sport's history. They halted the final mid-match to prevent a full-scale riot. The lights were cut, armed guards were called in to clear the stands, yet it took over an hour to do so. The tension was so high in the aftermath that the Malaysian team fled to the airport in the middle of the night. In the wake, the BWF did suggest finishing the final in New Zealand, but Indonesia refused. The title returned to Malaysia in a cloud of controversy. Yet, amidst all this chaos, an 18-year-old Rudy Hartono emerged unscathed. He finished the tournament undefeated, having beaten players like former All England champion Tan Ai Kwang. It was the ultimate baptism by fire, proving that if Rudy could keep his head in the Astora riot, no arena in the world could ever break him. Something that he would prove when he made his All England debut the following year. In Wembley in 1968, at his first ever All England, he showed all his skills and mental fortitude, turning that potential into actualization as he won the whole tournament, joining his senior and teammate Tanjo Hock as only the 4th player to win on his maiden appearance. What makes this particular All England victory of Hartono especially important in this whole story is that in the semi-finals he defeated none other than Svend Pri. It was a tough 3-game battle, pitting the physical strength and power of Pri against the guile, fluid footwork and touch of Rudy Hartono. Sven was the only player that year to take a game off of Hartono, something which no one was able to do again in the next 6 years at the All England. In fact, no one came close, not even Svend Pri himself, who was comfortably defeated by Hartono in both the 1970 and 1972 final. Rudy Hartono, it seemed, was immortal at the All England. However, in 1974, that air of invincibility around Rudy Hartono did waver ever so slightly. Hartono was still able to come away as champion, but he didn't do it in the same emphatic way he had done the previous 6 years. Instead of dominating, he struggled, going to 3 games in his quarterfinal, semi-final and final. He may still have won and retained his unofficial world title, and he may have just equalled Erland record of 7 All England men's singles titles, doing so at the age of just 24 years old. Yet despite this, the main takeaway people had wasn't could he win it again and eclipse Erland record. No, it was simply that Rudy Hartono was beatable, or as the World Badminton magazine put it, mortal. There was one player though who knew that Hartono was mortal before those 1974 All England Championships even got underway. Svend Pri. And he knew it for one simple reason, as he was the one who had beaten Hartono the previous year in a different venue where it once seemed Hartono was immortal, the Istora Senayan. Just like at the Wembley Arena where the All England was held back then, at the Istora Senayan, Rudy Hartono seemed immortal. Ever since those heroics in the 1967 Thomas Cup final against Malaysia, Hartono had defeated all he had faced inside the Istora Senayan. But during the 1973 Thomas Cup, whilst Indonesia emphatically reclaimed the trophy, defeating Denmark 8-1 in the final, that 1 point that Denmark won came from Svend Pri defeating Rudy Hartono. Svend Pri had just become the first man to give Hartono the taste of defeat inside the Istora. Now, I have to say, this is probably one of Svend Pri's greatest ever wins of his whole career. And I say that not just because he beat a player in a venue where he seemed immortal, but more so because back then playing in Asia was incredibly difficult, especially for European players. These days, all arenas and venues for professional tournaments are air-conditioned. No smoking is allowed either, and the crowd are kept away from the courts. Back in the 1960s, it was the complete opposite. It was incredibly hot, humid, and the crowds, especially in the Astora, were much wilder. Svend Pri, though, dealt with all of that, winning not just the match, but also the Astora crowd with his charisma and the effort he put forth into every single point. Unsurprisingly, this match and subsequent result garnered the most media interest. Svend Pri was interviewed after for the Straits Times, where he talked about how he beat the great Hartono, how his match with Hartono was his only goal for the tournament, as he knew Denmark couldn't beat Indonesia, and most importantly, that it gave him huge confidence should he face Hartono again, anywhere. The reason for this confidence in Svend Pri's mind was not just because he had beaten Hartono in his own backyard, but also that whilst he felt he was entering his prime, he felt Hartono was slipping, even going so far as to say that by the next Thomas Cup, he felt Hartono would not make the team. Svend Pri, though, wasn't the only person who felt this way, as even Indonesian news outlets asked the same question in the aftermath of that Thomas Cup. As you are aware, Hartono did somewhat answer this question the following year at the All England when he won the title for a 7th time. But the fact he didn't win it as emphatically still left some doubts surrounding the Indonesian, although there could have been an explanation for that, as following that loss to Svend Pri, Rudy Hartono didn't play competitively again until the All England. Hartono, it seemed, had actually taken Svend Pri's advice, who had also said this in that 1973 interview. Hartono is ailing from too much badminton. He needs a long rest or else he will decline rapidly. Heading into the 1975 All England, there was plenty on the line, especially for the two main protagonists of this story. Rudy Hartono was looking for a record-breaking 8th All England title, an 8th consecutive title, and Svend Pri was looking to not just guard Erland Kopps's record, but win his first All England men's singles title in the process, a title he had been hunting for a decade. Despite the history, many did feel that this could be Svend Pri's year. He entered the event as the top seed, having won both World Invitational titles in 1974, with one of those being held in Jakarta. Rudy Hartono, on the other hand, had once again played far fewer events, which is reflected in his seeded position of 8, a position that actually made him the 3rd ranked Indonesian at the event. When the action unfolded, it did become quickly apparent to everyone that a Pri versus Hartono final was inevitable, as both came through round after round with distinctly different styles, yet the same devastating effect. Doubts over Hartono's level or his mortality were quickly squashed as he reached the final with relative ease, not dropping a game, playing in a way that seemed like he was floating on water. Svend Pri, on the other hand, whilst he had to go the full distance in a few rounds, still managed to bulldoze his way through his opponents, none more so than in the semi-final against 3rd seed Chun Chun. With a 15-5, 15-love demolition, he set up the dream final. This was to be their 3rd meeting in the final of the All England, with the two previous going easily in favour of Rudy Hartono. But this year, like I said, things felt different, with the main reasons being what I have already laid out. However, there was one other thing that I haven't mentioned that did give the advantage back to the 7-time champion. A week previously at the Danish Open, Rudy Hartono defeated Svend Pri in the final. In that final, Svend Pri came out with the same tactic he had used to great effect at the Astora 2 years previous, hard and fast. But whereas he was able to see that one through, Hartono was far better prepared in Denmark, and when Svend dropped, Hartono pounced.
And the final on this occasion is between Rudy Hartono on the far side there. There he is from Indonesia. who's won this title on 7 consecutive occasions, and is trying to win it for the 8th time. And if he does that, he will beat the record of the great Erland Kops of Denmark, who won it 7 times, but not 7 times on the trot. And on the other side is Svend Pri of Denmark,
on my right, Rudy Hartono,
who's lost twice in this final before to Rudy Hartono.
Based on all their previous meetings, the tactics for this final were pretty much set in stone. Svend Pri had given his blueprint to defeat Hartono back in that 73 interview. He was going to avoid the net if possible, play fast and aggressively, and whenever possible attack Hartono's backhand corner, the one area he felt Hartono was weak. For Hartono, he knew to expect a fast start from Svend, but he also knew that the likelihood of Svend Pri blowing himself out was high. If he could stay composed, extend the rallies wherever possible, and wait for his moment to pounce, then a record-breaking 8th title could be his. The only uncertainty was surrounding Svend Pri's emotions. How would he handle this situation? Yes, in Jakarta, with thousands of fans firmly against him, in much less favourable playing conditions, he managed to win. Svend had also won other huge titles like the World Invitational Championships, twice. But the stakes in this match were far higher. This was for an All-England men's singles title, the most prestigious prize in badminton, a prize that had eluded him for the past decade. What added to this was that compared to 1974, where Hartono looked vulnerable in many of his matches, this year he didn't. He hadn't dropped a game and never really looked in trouble of doing so. This psychological factor was certainly present in the early stages of this final, as Hartono quickly raced to a 4-love lead. But whereas in their previous finals in 1970 and 1972, Svend Pri didn't fold. He was a far stronger player now, and he showed all of that development by turning that 4-love deficit into a 7-4 lead, which he then converted into winning the opening game 15-11. Svend Pri was in complete control of the match. The tactics that had worked in Jakarta were working again here, especially the smash down the backhand side of Hartono, smashes that were coming down with ferocious power. In the second game, the energy and excitement inside the Wembley Arena went up a notch. Both players were now fully into the match and playing some fantastic badminton. However, just like their encounter the week prior in Denmark, it seemed Hartono was getting a grasp on things, as at the midway point he found himself 8-4 up. Pri, though, just like in the first game, stormed back with vengeance and got himself into a commanding lead at 12-8. It was at this point that the crowd started to become restless. Were they about to witness history being made? Were they about to see the king get dethroned? With the way Svend Pri was playing, it felt like a formality more than anything else. Hartono, though, was a true champion, and just like true champions, he showed that you can never count him out. And shot by shot, point by point, he clawed his way back, and then got ahead, even earning himself a game point at 14-12. Svend Pri was starting to fade, and by contrast, Hartono was starting to fly. That excitement of the new champion the crowd had felt just moments ago was fading, and it was being replaced with a familiar one everyone had felt for the past 7 years. But just as that sense was settling in, all changed once more. Svend Pri put in another huge push and closed the gap to 14-all.
Oh yes!
The tension in the Wembley Arena was now palpable. This was a true clutch moment. If it was a film, this would either be the huge finale or the turning point in everything. With so much on the line, you'd be excused for thinking that Hartono had the advantage. But Svend Pri, bolstered by his great form that week, his numerous titles over the past year, and his wins over Hartono, was the player who played the setting situation far better. And after 37 minutes of scintillating badminton, he became the player to truly show Hartono's mortality inside the Wembley Arena, much to the crowd's delight and his own disbelief.
Yes, yes! And he's done it! He's done it! The tears are there! That's one of the great emotional moments of sport for me. His mother's here, his wife's here. He's been playing this game since he's 9. This is his 20th year, And he's crowned it with the accolade of badminton, the All England Championship, the virtual World Championship. And Svend Pri will want nothing more from badminton.
Match to Pri, 15-11, 17-14.
Oh yes, you could see that.
Like I said at the beginning of this video, this 1975 All England men's singles final is iconic and legendary, but not for the badminton these two played. They both played far better matches with one another, but it was the stage it was played on and the whole story behind it that elevated it to a different level, and why I always knew I wanted to do a video on it. Another reason I wanted to do this video is that despite these two being legends of their era, and having played in many huge finals and matches, I haven't even mentioned the fact they played in the final of the 1972 Olympics when badminton was a demonstration event. Yes, despite this, there isn't much good quality footage of their matches. The clips I have used for this final are the best out there, and they only total about 11 minutes. So I knew I had to bring to light not just this final, but their rivalry as well. It was a rivalry that grabbed many people's attention, as not only was it the West versus the East, but in almost every single way they differed, something you can clearly see in the clips I've shown. Rudy Hartono was like smoke, gliding around the court, moving like he was floating on clouds, whereas Svend Pri was more like a force of nature, the floorboards physically creaking under his power. Even their personalities were different. Svend Pri was charismatic, so charismatic in fact that even when he defeated Hartono in Jakarta, the crowd ended up loving him as they respected the sheer effort he put into everything on court. That and a small fact after the match, he threw 3 of his rackets into the stands, with the reason being, "Don't you think that my friends up there would be happy to have a piece of the racket that beat Rudy?" Hartono, on the other hand, was very softly spoken, often downplaying his own achievements, famously telling reporters who called him the world champion as he was the All England champion that he couldn't be as the whole world didn't participate. And as both players stood next to each other following that 1975 final, you can see those differences in stark visual form. Svend Pri dripping with sweat, his hair a mess, whilst Rudy Hartono looks like he hasn't even played yet. But despite their differences, these two undoubtedly respected each other, with Rudy Hartono admitting years later that Svend Pri was his greatest rival. And through that mutual respect for one another, they also became close friends. Years after both had retired, with Hartono becoming an official for the Indonesian team, the two reconnected on a trip to Denmark in early 1983. Retirement had proven a difficult transition for both men. When Hartono learned that Svend Pri was struggling with family and financial burdens, reaching a point where he even tried to end his own life, Hartono saw his own reflection in his old rival. Having gone through similar struggles and finding his own stability through faith, Hartono reached out, hoping to offer Svend that same lifeline. He left Denmark with an open invitation for Svend to visit him in Indonesia, a gesture intended to pull his friend out from the dark. Sadly though, it was a visit that never happened. On June 8, 1983, at just 38 years old, Svend Pri took his own life. The news stunned the badminton world, and it totally devastated Hartono. For Hartono, Svend wasn't just a player who had ended his All England streak, or a player who had given him his most bitterest loss. He wasn't just his greatest rival, he was his friend. He was a mirror who had reflected his own greatness. In his grief, Hartono found a new path. He would later say that the loss of his friend, coupled with his own history of struggles, led him further towards his spiritual side. It's with all of this that when I look back at the footage of that 1975 All England final, I see more than just a trophy changing hands. I see two men who defined an era. Svend Pri taught the world how to beat an icon, and in doing so he taught Rudy Hartono how to be human. They began as two players on separate journeys, became fierce rivals, and then legends. But more than any of that, in the end, they were simply two friends. Though separated by an ocean, they remained united by a game that neither could ever truly leave behind.